They were admired by their neighbors, respected in their careers, and envied on social media. A beautiful couple with 3 smiling kids, elegant family portraits, and a home that looked straight out of a magazine. Marlo and Tanedra were everything people aspired to be: faithful, successful, and deeply in love. Or so it seemed. But behind closed doors, something dark was brewing. Resentment, secrets, and betrayal festered beneath the polished surface. And on one ordinary Tuesday night, in the quiet glow of their suburban kitchen, one chilling question echoed louder than ever: what do you do when the person you trust most dares you to lose control? How does love turn into hatred? What happens when the very hands that once held you in comfort become the ones wrapped around your throat? Before we dive into this chilling case of love, rage, and revenge, like this video and subscribe for more true crime stories that expose the terrifying cracks beneath the surface of perfect lives. Tanedra Blackwell was everything people in Macon, Georgia, admired: refined, ambitious, and effortlessly elegant. At 33, she was the vice principal at a local middle school, respected by parents, students, and teachers alike. Her career was a testament to her dedication, her belief in shaping young minds, and her unwavering commitment to her community. On Sunday mornings, she led the children's ministry at her church, delivering passionate lessons that were equal parts uplifting and thought-provoking. Her words, often laced with wisdom and scripture, earned her a devoted following within her church. Beyond her professional life, Tanedra was a social media sensation, with over 100,000 Instagram followers. She had mastered the art of projecting a perfect life online. Her feed was a carefully curated mix of affirmations, motivational quotes, and, of course, the kind of love that could only be seen as flawless. She posted pictures of her smiling children, her latest outfits, and, most of all, her husband, Marlo Blackwell. To her followers, Tanedra's marriage was the epitome of romance, a glowing example of what true love looked like. She frequently posted about her king, the man who swept her off her feet, always with a heartfelt caption about gratitude and faith. Marlo, 35, had always been a charismatic figure in Macon. Known for his athleticism in high school, he had been a local football hero who went on to run a successful auto body shop. His business had grown from a modest garage to a thriving operation. In his spare time, he mentored troubled youth in the community, offering guidance and teaching them the value of hard work and integrity. He was a beloved figure in town, always seen helping out, always ready to lend a hand. Marlo's community car shows, held every few months, were a big event, bringing together people from all walks of life to appreciate the art of automotive craftsmanship. His relationship with Tanedra seemed to be the perfect balance of ambition, love, and faith. The couple had been married for 6 years, and their union was the stuff of dreams. On social media, they painted an image of unwavering devotion. Anniversary celebrations, spontaneous trips, matching outfits, and quiet evenings spent in each other's company, everything about them screamed perfection. Marlo, ever the romantic, would surprise Tanedra with flowers, extravagant dates, and heartfelt messages that left no doubt in anyone's mind about the depth of his love for her. In return, Tanedra would share their most intimate moments with the world, calling Marlo her king and saying he was the light of her life in a world that often felt cold and dark. But beneath the perfectly posed photos, the affirmations, and the carefully orchestrated public appearances, something was starting to crack. Tanedra, who had always been a picture of grace, was growing increasingly distant. She was tired of being the perfect wife, the perfect mother, and the perfect example for everyone else. She was starting to feel as though she was losing herself in the process. Marlo, on the other hand, had been hiding a deep frustration that was eating away at him. The pressure of his success, the demands of running a business, and the responsibilities of mentoring youth had started to weigh on him more than he cared to admit. He had been a star on the football field, but now, in his mid-30s, he felt as though his life was starting to plateau. His marriage, once his greatest source of pride, was beginning to feel suffocating. But even with the tension mounting between them, neither Tanedra nor Marlowe had any idea that their perfect facade was about to come crashing down. No one could have predicted that the bond they had spent years cultivating, years of love, admiration, and faith, would one day dissolve into a horrific confrontation that would shatter their lives and their community forever. While Tanedra spent her days organizing school board meetings and giving inspiring TEDx talks about Black youth empowerment, Marlowe's life outside of their picture-perfect home was spiraling into chaos. The small compromises that he initially made, those seemingly innocent moments, eventually snowballed into something far more dangerous. It all started innocuously, with a flirtatious text from a customer at his auto body shop, a playful exchange that hinted at something more, but Marlowe was able to dismiss it. One drink after work turned into another, and before long, it led to a backseat encounter in the parking lot. The thrill of something forbidden gripped him in a way he hadn't expected. He knew it was wrong, but the rush was intoxicating. Her name was Tishelle Craven, a 22-year-old social media influencer who worked at a nearby salon. Tishelle was everything Tanedra wasn't. Wild, free-spirited, and unapologetically provocative, she lived a life on the edge. She didn't pray before meals, she didn't care for modesty, and she certainly didn't hide her sensuality behind closed doors. Her social media was a raw, unapologetic expression of her body and desires, lip-syncing videos filmed in lingerie, cryptic posts that flirted with forbidden attraction. "Y'all ever fall for somebody you ain't supposed to?" She once captioned a selfie, teasing her followers with a story of forbidden love. And, for Marlowe, that was exactly what she became, a forbidden love. What started as a fleeting distraction soon became a full-blown affair, and Marlowe began to juggle his life between two worlds, one that adored him for his community involvement and devotion to his wife, and another where he lived out his desires with Tishelle in the shadows. He convinced himself he could manage both. Sunday mornings were for church with Tanedra, sitting beside her in their pew, praying for strength, for their future, for their family. But by Monday, he was in the back seat of his truck with Tishelle, her fingers in his hair, the scent of her perfume still lingering as they shared moments of raw passion and reckless abandon. Marlowe became skilled at hiding his betrayal, expertly switching between his two identities. When he was with Tanedra, he was the loving husband, attentive and affectionate. But when he slipped away, when he answered Tishelle's calls, when he met her after work, he shed his responsibilities and gave in to the lustful freedom she offered. The secrecy, the lies, they became a part of him. He turned his phone face down when Tanedra entered the room, avoided direct eye contact, and always had an excuse for why he stayed late at the shop or went out with friends. Yet, despite his best efforts to conceal the affair, it was clear that the cracks were starting to show. Tanedra was no fool. She was perceptive, and she noticed the subtle changes in him, the way he started wearing different cologne, the late nights that stretched into mornings, the way his phone never left his side and was suddenly always face down when he was home. Her instincts screamed at her, but she didn't want to believe it. She refused to acknowledge what she feared most, that Marlowe, the man she had entrusted her heart to, the father of their children, was betraying her. Still, her heart held on to hope, clinging to the idea that their love was strong enough to survive anything, even the secrets that were festering beneath the surface. When Tanedra asked him about his behavior, Marlowe deflected. He showered her with affection, claiming that she was overthinking, that it was just stress from work or his long hours at the shop. But when he wasn't deflecting, he was becoming defensive, accusing her of being paranoid, of being insecure. And every time, Tanedra withdrew, silencing the nagging feeling in her chest. Instead, she prayed harder, asking God for guidance, for strength, and for answers. She had to believe that this was just a phase, that it wasn't as bad as it seemed, and that they would come out of it stronger. But the lies piled up, and the longer they went unaddressed, the heavier the burden became. Marlowe's deception was no longer something he could control, it was a ticking time bomb, one that would eventually explode and tear apart everything he had built. As the affair with Tishelle deepened, so did the risk of discovery. But Marlowe continued to live in denial, thinking that somehow, he could escape the inevitable fallout. He never imagined that his secret life, the one he believed he could keep hidden, would soon become the catalyst for a chain of events that would end in tragedy. It was a humid Sunday in July when Tanedra made the fateful decision to return early from the women's retreat. A church elder had fallen ill, and though she hadn't planned to leave the retreat so soon, her sense of duty pushed her to head home. She didn't call ahead, she simply wanted to surprise her husband, perhaps even spend a quiet afternoon together after her weekend away. As she pulled into the driveway, she noticed Marlowe's Camaro SS parked outside, unusual for him to be home this early. The sight left her confused but unprepared for what she was about to walk into. She entered the house quietly, heels in hand, trying to be discreet. But as she neared the bedroom, she heard it, the unmistakable sound of female laughter. The laughter was light, flirtatious, and all too familiar in the worst way. Frozen in place, Tanedra's heart hammered in her chest as she struggled to make sense of the sound. She stood there for a moment, paralyzed, before her legs carried her forward. Each step felt like an eternity as her breath quickened, and her mind raced. She crept toward the bedroom door, her pulse echoing in her ears. And then, as she cracked the door open just a sliver, she saw them. Marlowe, her husband, the man she trusted with everything, lay in their bed, naked, tangled in their white Egyptian cotton sheets, laughing. And on top of him, her worst nightmare, Tichelle. The young woman, her husband's mistress, wore nothing but a silk bonnet, her smile wide and carefree, as though they were the only two people in the world. Tanedra's body went numb with disbelief. Her throat tightened, and before she could control it, the scream tore from her lips, a primal, guttural sound that filled the room with raw anguish. Marlowe jumped from the bed, stammering incoherently, his face flashing a mixture of guilt and panic. "Titane, baby, he began, but his voice faltered, lost in the chaos of the moment. Tichelle shrieked, clutching the sheets around her like a shield, her eyes wide with terror. She scrambled to cover herself, but it was too late. Tanedra's mind had already snapped. The love she once felt for Marlowe seemed to evaporate in an instant, replaced by a searing rage that overtook her every thought. Her heart pounded in her ears, and her hands shook, but her legs moved on instinct, charging toward the kitchen. In the cold silence of the kitchen, Tanedra grabbed the serrated butcher knife from the block. The weight of it in her hand felt like a cruel reminder of the rage bubbling up from deep inside her. Without a second thought, she turned and stormed back toward the bedroom. The confrontation was now inevitable. She was possessed by fury, every sense heightened and distorted. Tanedra didn't even hear Marlowe's desperate pleas as she burst into the bedroom, her movements swift and violent. She lunged at Tichelle, the blade flashing through the air in a blur of silver, its sharp edge cutting through the charged atmosphere. Tichelle's scream pierced the air, a horrifying shriek of terror as she tried to make a run for it, but Tanedra was already on top of her. She tackled her, the momentum carrying both women to the floor, and with no hesitation, Tanedra began stabbing. The first thrust of the knife landed with sickening precision. Tichelle's body jerked, a cry of pain escaping her lips, but it wasn't enough to stop Tanedra. She drove the knife into her again, and then again, the sharp blade slicing into flesh with each desperate motion. Once. Twice. 12 times. Blood stained the sheets, the floor, the walls. Marlowe's frantic attempts to stop her only added to the chaos. He lunged at Tanedra, but his movements were clumsy, his mind too clouded with fear and shock to think clearly. He reached for her, trying to pull her off of Tichelle, but in his desperation, he earned a slash of his own. The blade caught him on his forearm, the sharp edge cutting deep, but he barely felt it as the world around him spun into confusion. The scene was madness, a violent storm of emotions and actions, each one driving Tanedra deeper into her frenzy. She didn't hear the ringing in her ears, didn't hear the frantic shouts from Marlowe, didn't care. In the end, there was nothing left but blood, tears, and silence. The woman she had once called a friend lay motionless on the floor, and the man she had loved, the man she had given everything to, stood there. Wounded, shaking, but still alive. In less than a minute, the bedroom had become a scene of horror, drenched in blood. The room, once a place of intimacy, now resembled a battlefield. Tishelle lay on the floor, her body still twitching as she gasped for breath, struggling to hold on to life. Her last words were barely a whisper, a pitiful attempt to cling to the world that had so suddenly and violently rejected her. Her eyes, once full of defiance and life, now stared vacantly at the ceiling. Marlowe was paralyzed with fear, his mind racing but unable to process the reality of what had just happened. He knelt beside Tishelle's lifeless form, shaking violently, his hands slick with blood. His mind could only fixate on her. He couldn't save her. He didn't know how. His attempts at CPR were futile, his hands pressed futilely against Tishelle's chest as he screamed for her to wake up. But there was no response. The sound of his pleas echoed through the room, amplifying the sickening finality of the situation. Tanedra stood motionless in the doorway, the knife still clutched tightly in her hand. Her breath was slow, deliberate, as if she had become numb to the chaos around her. The blood that covered her hands, her arms, dripped onto the floor, but she didn't move. She didn't even flinch. The sounds of sirens grew louder in the distance, but in that moment, Tanedra didn't feel urgency. Her world had shrunk to this one horrifyingly intimate scene, her husband cradling his mistress's body, her own hands stained with the consequences of her fury. There was no panic. No remorse. Just an overwhelming emptiness. When the police arrived, they found the chaos waiting for them, a scene too violent, too shocking, to comprehend in its entirety. Neighbors had already called in, shaken by the screams and commotion that had erupted from the house. The officers stormed inside, weapons drawn, but their presence did little to break the suffocating tension in the room. They immediately turned their attention to Marlowe, whose trembling body clutched Tishelle as if he could somehow reverse the carnage that had unfolded. He was covered in her blood, his face twisted in disbelief, his chest heaving with shallow breaths. Tanedra barely acknowledged the officers as they approached. Her gaze remained fixed on the lifeless form of Tishelle, the woman who had torn apart her life, who had stolen her trust, and in the most savage way, forced her to do the unthinkable. As the officers took their positions, guns still drawn, Tanedra whispered, her voice soft but eerily calm. God saw. I cleaned his house. The words seemed to hang in the air, cold and detached from the world they had just entered. As the officers handcuffed her, the once picture-perfect life she had clung to shattered, slipping away like water through her fingers. Within hours of the grisly murder, the story of Tanedra Blackwell spread like wildfire, consuming every corner of the media landscape. What was once a glowing example of a woman who had it all, respect, grace, and a flawless marriage, had quickly crumbled into a sensationalized narrative of betrayal, rage, and death. The case captivated the nation, with every news outlet in Georgia, and soon across the country, covering the brutal confrontation. The woman who had once stood as a beacon of Southern elegance was now painted as a killer, her image shattered in the eyes of millions. On social media, the reactions were as divided as they were intense. Some rallied behind Tanedra, using hashtags like #TayDidWhatNeeded, arguing that she had been pushed too far by her husband's infidelity. They sympathized with her as a woman who had finally snapped after enduring months of lies and deceit. Social media erupted in a storm of
debate over the nature of her crime. Tishelle's past was dragged into the public eye, with social media users digging up her old tweets, many of which now seemed eerily prophetic. Investigators uncovered disturbing new evidence that only intensified the public's fascination with the case. Voice memos from Tanedra to a close friend were played in court, revealing her mounting paranoia in the days leading up to the murder. In one voice memo, she spoke cryptically, her voice tinged with anxiety. "He don't come home smellin' like work no more. Somethin' off," she had said, her tone betraying the strain she had been under. Those words echoed in the public's mind as they painted a picture of a woman on the edge, slowly unraveling in the face of her husband's betrayal. Simultaneously, investigators also uncovered text messages exchanged between Marlowe and Tichelle in the days before the murder. The messages revealed plans to meet at the house, under the assumption that Tanedra would be away. The text seemed to confirm Tanedra's worst fears, that her husband had been leading a double life, and that his affair had been much more than just a brief fling. And amidst all the noise, a final, unspoken question hung heavy in the air: why didn't Marlowe tell the truth before it turned deadly? Why had he allowed this dangerous web of lies to grow, leading to an irreversible confrontation? The public was left with no clear answers, just the haunting image of a life shattered in one fatal moment. The courtroom buzzed with tension as the trial of Tanedra Blackwell unfolded. She stood in front of the judge, her once graceful demeanor now replaced with a quiet, unwavering gaze. Charged with first-degree murder and aggravated assault, Tanedra's fate hung in the balance. Her defense team argued for temporary insanity, claiming that the years of betrayal and emotional torment had pushed her to a breaking point. They painted her as a woman consumed by jealousy, driven to the edge by the crushing realization that her life, the life she had carefully built with Marlowe, had been a lie. But the prosecution's case was just as powerful. They painted Tanedra as a woman who, despite her exterior of strength and grace, had been obsessed with control. They argued that her violent act had been premeditated, the culmination of months of planning, fueled not just by infidelity but by a deep, consuming desire to punish Marlowe for every perceived slight. The images of her holding the knife, covered in blood, haunted the jurors as they listened to the prosecution's portrayal of her as a cold-blooded killer. Then, it was Marlowe's turn to testify. His words shattered the courtroom, turning the case from a story of a broken marriage to one of irreversible destruction. "She didn't just kill Tichelle," Marlowe cried, his voice breaking. "She killed everything we ever had." The weight of those words hit Tanedra like a slap. His emotional testimony, drenched in sorrow and guilt, painted her not as a victim of betrayal, but as the aggressor who had taken everything from him. The audience watched in stunned silence as Marlowe's voice cracked, and he described the devastation of losing both his lover and the woman he had once pledged to love forever. His words struck at the heart of Tanedra's defense, and the jury deliberated for hours, weighing the evidence against the woman who had been a symbol of community grace. After 8 hours of tense deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. Tanedra Blackwell was found guilty on all counts of first-degree murder and aggravated assault. The room was silent as the gavel fell, the gravity of the decision sinking in. For Tanedra, the verdict was a devastating confirmation that her life would never be the same. At her sentencing, Tanedra was given life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the judge's words echoed in her ears, Tanedra remained composed. When the time came for her to speak, her voice was steady, but the pain was evident in her words. "I meant my vows. He broke his. She died in my bed." The finality of her statement hung in the air, a reminder of the profound betrayal she had endured. It was a tragic reflection of her belief that love had once meant everything, and that commitment was sacred, until it was shattered. The aftermath of the trial was swift and brutal. The Blackwell home, once a symbol of success and love, was abandoned. No one would ever live in that house again, its walls now haunted by the memories of the crime that had unfolded within them. Tichelle's family, devastated by the loss of their daughter, filed a wrongful death lawsuit against both Marlowe and Tanedra's estate, seeking justice for the young woman whose life had been taken too soon. Their pain was compounded by the knowledge that Tichelle had been more than just a pawn in a bitter marital dispute. She had been a person with dreams, aspirations, and a future that had been cruelly stolen from her. As for Marlowe, he disappeared from the public eye. His social media accounts were deleted, his presence erased from the platforms where he had once shared his life with the world. Rumors swirled that he had moved to Florida, seeking to escape the public scrutiny and the shattered pieces of his own life. Whether he truly sought redemption or simply wanted to escape the wreckage of the life he had helped destroy remained unclear. What was certain, however, was that Marlowe's life, like Tanedra's, would never be the same. The fallout from the case left a trail of destruction in its wake, forever altering the lives of everyone involved. What had once been a picture-perfect marriage had been reduced to nothing more than a tragic reminder of how betrayal, jealousy, and revenge can unravel even the most seemingly unbreakable bonds. This tragedy is a haunting reminder of what happens when betrayal, rage, and silence collide. In a world obsessed with perfection and image, the story of Tanedra, Marlowe, and Tichelle exposes the dark, violent consequences of living a lie. What appeared to be a beautiful, idealistic life was, in reality, a powder keg, waiting for the moment when the truth would be revealed. As we witness the unraveling of a seemingly perfect marriage, we're confronted with the terrifying reality that the consequences of deception can be more devastating than anyone could have ever imagined. Could this have been avoided if Marlowe had ended the affair? Could the emotional wreckage have been spared if he had confronted his betrayal head-on, instead of allowing it to fester in the shadows? Was Tanedra justified in her rage, or did her heartbreak push her over the edge, causing her to lose herself in a moment of despair and violence? These questions will linger long after the headlines fade, as we're left to wonder just how far a person can be pushed before their heart fractures beyond repair. If this story shook you, like and subscribe for more disturbing tales of love, lies, and murder hiding beneath picture-perfect lives.